So receptors are how the cells communicate with each other. So think about it this way: if we're a collective of cells trying to work together to make this human body function, those cells need to talk to each other. Well, how do they talk to each other? Well, they talk to each other by direct contact, so they know what's around them. But they talk to each other through hormones like insulin, and thyroid, and all that sort of stuff.
Dr. Jeff Matheson, welcome back to the Keto Camp podcast.
Well, it's great to be back here, Ben.
So if you haven't heard the first episode that Dr. Jeff was on, it was episode 75 of the Keto Camp podcast. You could hear more of his story, how he got involved with what he's doing today. And we took a deep dive into the dangers of fish oil. We talked about the cell membrane structure. We talked about these healthy essential fatty acids and so much more. And you could go listen to that episode. Right now, it's episode 75. So go listen to that when you're done with this one. On today's episode, we're going to deep dive into more of the cell membrane, more into some of your case studies, and talk about the viruses and bacteria out there and how they actually can penetrate the body when you have a weakened cell membrane, an inflamed cell membrane. So I'm excited to chat with you, Dr. Jeff.
Oh, it'd be fun. Yeah.
It's always fun with you. You are brilliant at what you do. So let's get right into this. Let's start with the cell membrane. Can you just, from somebody who just has no idea what that is, talk about the structure of it and go into the cell membrane for us?
All right. So when we talk about the cell, each individual cell, there's about 70 trillion cells inside of every one of us, sort of working as a cooperative. But each of those cells, and if you go back to your sort of grade 11 biology, hopefully a lot of people have had that out there. Each cell is surrounded by a membrane, and that membrane is made of lipids or fats and protein. It's about half and half. But the lipid composition or fat composition of that cell membrane is extremely important for not only the structure of the cell, but for the function of the cell. And one of the problems that I run into consistently, and even in scientists today, they forget that nature doesn't have, they don't separate function and structure. They're integrated. They work together. And so the composition of the fats of our cell membrane are extremely important to the health of the cell. And in fact, no cell can survive without a membrane on it. It's been quoted that, life started with the membrane. We always talk about the nucleus and passing out of genetic material and genetics this and genetics that. In reality, it's the cell membrane that came first, because that allowed these entities to isolate themselves or protect themselves from each other and grow and become the varied single cell organisms we see today, all the way up to human beings and elephants and giraffes and whales and things like that. So, and one of the things that's been neglected, that's been very frustrating for me to deal with is we never look at the health of the cell membrane when we hear the talk shows on TV or read medical literature. They never talk about cell membrane health. And it's, of course, of vital importance today, because we are attacking our cell membranes every single day with the food that we consume. And it's one thing that's never talked about is that our adulterated food supply is probably overwhelmingly leading us down the path of chronic disease and illness that we see almost ubiquitously across the United States and Canada, in fact, most of the world now today, because we were busy exporting the standard American diet to almost every country in the world quite efficiently, and China in only a 20-year period was able to catch up to the number of diabetics in the USA, which USA took 60 years to get to, which is a pretty impressive feat. And so
that's really impressive, and I call it the stupid American diet, by the way.
Yes, yeah, there you go. So, and the fats are the most important part of these cell membranes. So these membranes are two layers of lipids stacked opposing each other, made of phospholipids. So basically they have a tail on them that doesn't like water, and a part and the head of the part likes water. So the two water ends actually come together like this, and the tails that repel water out here. And those tails are actually made of fatty acids. And the fatty acid composition of that cell membrane determines how fluid it is, how penetrable it is, or how it functions. And a lot of people forget about function, but the cell membrane function is very interesting, because not everybody talks about it. they seem to talk about the cell membrane as sort of the static, like it's just there to act as a barrier to let some things in and doesn't let other things in. But it doesn't, it's not. It's a fluid, rapidly moving system. In fact, when you consume a fat, it actually redistributes within your body, every cell of your body, within about 10 to 20 minutes. It's extremely fast. Your body's really good at distributing these fats around. And so these fats are ultra important in the membrane of our cells, or cellular function. And when we
Is
put
that
it up,
is that when you eat fats, good or bad? It's distributed 10 to 20 minutes throughout the body.
good or bad, this is the problem. The body can't tell. One of the problems is with our American diet is that the adulterated fats that are in there are do not normally exist in nature. Therefore, the body doesn't know how to screen them out, right? So they're going to undergo the same pathways that utilize the same pathways that the normal fats would. And then we start distributing these fats to all these different cells, so we're poisoning all our cells at the same time when we eat bad stuff. And so when we eat adulterated fats, we alter how our cell membranes actually function. So if you're eating a diet that's 35% adulterated fats, which is very easy to do these days, you're going to get a cell membrane that's 35% less functional, right? And we can probably tolerate longer term about 20% abnormal fats in our cell membranes and still do okay. But much above that, we start getting into problems. And of course, this was the great work done by Otto Warburg in the 40s and 50s, which showed that if you decrease the ability of oxygen to get through your cell membranes by about 30-35%, which fats are responsible for, you actually greatly increase your risk of that cell turning cancerous. And we have an epidemic of cancer. In fact, I just did the calculation yesterday. In Canada, which is only a nation of 33 million people, we have 235 people die every single day of cancer. So the United States is 2,300 a day, every single day.
Wow.
It's about 10 to 1. And you're like, so cancer's an epidemic. Abortions, speaking of epidemics.
Right. Yeah. That's a real one.
It's a real epidemic, right? And so it turns out that the function of the cell membrane is intimately related to its fatty acid content. And so if we want to dive into more of what fats do what, I'm happy to go there. Depends on what you feel you want to get across to your members.
Yeah, well, I want them to understand, because I do talk a lot about this. When you are consuming the wrong fats for your body, these adulterated fats, which we'll get into which those are, it creates inflammation around the cell membrane, right? And then we have these integral membrane proteins, these receptor sites that are now inflamed as well. And what are the jobs of these receptor sites? What do they do on the cell?
All right. So receptors are how the cells communicate with each other, right? So think about it this way: if we're a collective of cells trying to work together to make this human body function, those cells need to talk to each other. Well, how do they talk to each other? Well, they talk to each other by direct contact, so they know what's around them. But they talk to each other through hormones like insulin and thyroid and all that sort of stuff. And so these proteins are all these receptor proteins are all transmembrane proteins. So they actually have a section that's above the membrane, a section that's in the membrane, a section that's below the membrane. But they're intimately involved. Their function's intimately involved in what that membrane is actually allowing them to do. So and this has been shown in diabetics especially, if you have membranes that have a lot of adulterated fats in them, that membrane actually inhibits the function of that insulin receptor. Hence, you get insulin resistance. What is type 2 diabetes? By definition, type 2 diabetes is insulin resistant. So you're going to become more prone to diabetes. And it's the same with all the other things. If you look at all the like thyroid problems or all this sort of stuff, you see receptors that when cell membranes are unhealthy, their receptors are less active, which means they're more resistant to the hormones. And you see this all the time. If you look at really obese men, they have the man boobs, right? That they have much more estrogen in them. They're much more testosterone resistant. There's a lot of things going on in there, and that's all to do with poor membrane health.
So when you're looking, for example, a lady who doesn't feel well. She has fatigue, she feels lethargic, and she's just feeling the symptoms of low thyroid function. And then her doctor's looking at her blood work and saying, your TSH looks good, your T4 looks good, your T3 looks good. But if she has an inflamed cell membrane and receptor site and it's not getting into the cell, she's not going to get well. And that's just one example because we have over 600 hormones. So it's all about, are those hormones, are the nutrients that you're eating getting into your cells through these receptor sites? And if they're inflamed, the answer is no, they're not, and you're not going to feel well. Is that correct, Jeff?
That's very correct. And you see this all the time, right? And that you'll do some blood work on someone, and they'll be sitting in front of you, and they weigh, a female, if she's in front of you, and she weighs 240 pounds or 250 pounds, and you do a thyroid test on them, their thyroid comes back normal, and then they'll be saying, well, your thyroid's normal. It's like, yeah, but you're 100 pounds overweight.
Yeah, and they feel like crap.
And they feel like crap. They're tired, and they've got all the classic signs of hypothyroidism, yet because they're in the normal range, they just say, well, you're normal. Well, that's not true. They're resistant, right? So you're not looking at us the right way. And before I do that all the time.
Me too. And before we get into the culprits here, the major culprits that cause this inflammation, before we get there, we will get there, audience, I promise, keto campers. Let's talk a little bit about this. Now that the membrane is inflamed, there's a communication between the membrane, the receptor sites, and the DNA nucleus, right?
Correct.
So what's that relationship like?
All these factors. So when we sequenced the human genome, right, we said, okay, we've sequenced the human genome. Here it is. Now we're going to solve all diseases. And guess what happened?
That Nothing. Didn't happen. Nothing.
And then they said, well, there's now this epi. Now they said, oh my God, what about altered gene expression also? So all these receptors actually influence gene expression. And so it's not the genetics that we have that determines our fate. It's how we express all these genetics. Because we're born with multiple sets of different genes, and they all have slightly different properties based on our environment. We can respond to our environment because of that altered genetic expression. Well, you start poisoning our membranes and altering our receptor function, we're going to alter our gene expressions and epigenetics of our genome. So we're now going to have altered responses to things that, so that the signals are going to get crossed. We're not going to react normally to environmental factors. And of course, we see this all the time in especially obese people, right? I mean, obesity is not, I hate, and I don't want to be talking about fat shaming or anything like that, but obese people are not healthy. And they're trying to make it normal, but it's not. But they have altered gene expression. They don't react normally to, satiation enzymes like ghrelin and all the other hormones. I mean, there's such a myriad of hormones. But that's just one example. Like, these people eat something, they should feel full, and they don't, right? But there's a hormone that actually communicates that to the rest of the cell, saying, stop, you've had enough. And then that hormone obviously is not working properly. So that's an example of resistance to hormones, and its influences gene expression and allowing the cell to respond to its environment. And of course, if a cell has altered membrane status, and it's also asking for help, and that's of course what inflammation is. Inflammation is really a call to action. It's a call to help. They release chemotactic factors, which attract white blood cells, which are supposed to help clear the problem. Of course, they can't clear the problem because we keep dumping more poison into the system. So
right.
We end up with this ongoing chronic inflammatory state, and of course, eventually you see the decay of society all around you. I mean, our life expectancy in North America has now gone down for the last 3 years in a row. That's a pretty concerning thing. So we've already turned the corner. We stopped making people healthier longer. And it's like, yay! It was a hard job, but we did it.
Right, and so genes essentially are like a light switch. You turn on genes, you turn off genes, and it's the epigenetics that matter. So if there's cancer or diabetes or heart disease that runs in the family, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be your future, like Dr. Jeff just explained. It's really our control whether we want to express those genes or not. And it all starts at the cell membrane, and life begins and ends at the cell membrane. So everything is kind of circling back to the cell membrane. And not only do we have our DNA nucleus, we also have the DNA within the mitochondria that helps us burn fat, that helps us live a long life, that helps us produce energy. So that also is connected to the cell membrane. It's the communication site. So if something's going on the outside that's inflammation, excessive inflammation, then inside that cell, there's going to be dysfunction. And the other problem is that when your cells produce energy, they do, just like if I were to burn firewood here and have some smoke, our cells produce cellular energy. And if you have inflammation around your cells, now bad stuff cannot get out and good stuff cannot get in. And that leads to disease, fatigue, and a whole host of symptoms. So life begins and ends at the cell membrane.
And of course, it also influences resistance to treatment. And you've probably seen this in your own client base, that they seem to be doing everything right, but they're not getting better, right? And it means there's so much inflammation, so much of a barrier that they literally can't get, because I've seen it all the time, right? You put people on just like a multivitamin or something like that, and they'll take it for 6 months and say, I don't feel any different. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, it's probably not even getting to where it's needed because they haven't fixed the cell membrane health first, right? And I'm sure you've seen that multiple times.
Yeah, even for myself too. When I was going through my health challenges, I was taking all the supplements. I didn't feel anything because I had all that inflammation.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a barrier. So and that's why you get the classic doctor statement that take a multivitamin gives you a really expensive urine, and it's like because it can't get in.
Yeah. Same thing with those who are chronically dehydrated, right? Because water needs to also enter the cell too.
That's right. Water needs to enter the cell. And of course, the biggest thing of all that it needs to enter the cell is oxygen. Which I've talked about on the previous podcast, and I don't know if you want me to go over that again. But,
go over the oxygenation part.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the misconceptions that's been in science for forever has been that the cell membrane passively lets oxygen cross into the cell where it gets to the mitochondria somehow magically and is used to produce energy. And that's the way I was taught back in the dark ages of the 80s. And it turns out that that's actually not true. And it's really fascinating because it's not looked at. But there's one study that came out in 1976 looking at cystic fibrosis patients and their lung cells. And it turns out that they found that linoleic acid, or the omega-6, that's why I keep talking about omega-6, has the same oxygen dissociation curve as hemoglobin. And as people may know, hemoglobin is what carries the oxygen to all the cells of our body for it to be used to produce energy. Turns out to get from your lungs to the mitochondria where it's actually used to produce energy, oxygen has to go through 7 cell membranes. Well, if it's just doing that passively, oxygen inside of a cell free is way too dangerous for the nature to have around. Oxygen by definition oxidizes things. And if you can imagine oxygen molecules sitting freely in a cell, and a protein comes along and it oxidizes it, makes it dysfunctional, that's going to be an issue. Well, it turns out that it binds to the omega-6 in the cell membrane, and it's the omega-6 that takes it to the mitochondria, where it's actually used to produce energy. Hence, you see this gradual increase in the concentration of omega-6 from the cell membrane, where it's usually around 25 to 33% of the fats, to the mitochondria membrane, which is about 40% of the fats, and the cardiolipin, which is where all the enzymatic reactions take place to produce energy in the mitochondria, is 100% omega-6. It turns out the omega-6 is extremely important, and that's what everybody seems to miss. That I keep getting this comment all the time, say there's too much omega-6 in our diet, omega-6 is pro-inflammatory, and it's the problem. It's like, no, it's not true. Omega-6 is predominant in our diet because it's supposed to be. It's the most important fat that we need to consume, and no life exists without omega-6. It doesn't happen. You take the omega-6 out of your entire body, you don't survive. Oxygen cannot get to your mitochondria. You cannot produce energy, and you will die. Period. End of story. And it's the adulterated omega-6, which is, all the processed vegetable oils we see today. Corn oil, soy oil, canola oil, margarine, all those things. And go any fast food restaurant, walk into, ask what even the fine restaurants, ask what they're cooking. They're cooking in those oils, like it or not. I remember a few months ago, I went to a fairly high-end restaurant, And I talked to the waiter and I said, are you using canola oil? And I said, oh, and he said, oh, no, we're not going to use that here. This is a fine restaurant. I said, oh, better check. Goes back to the kitchen. He comes back and says, oh my God,
Yep.
we use canola oil.
Yep.
And it's like, we're literally poisoning ourselves with all the stuff that we're eating. Every restaurant you see today, and I mean, I don't know if you go into Costco. I mean, every time I go into Costco, it's amazing. You see a small restaurant guy, and he's got a big cart full of canola oil because it's cheap. All right, but it's pure, unadulterated poison, right? And I don't know how to emphasize this enough. If you do not put proper fats in your cell membranes, you do not do well. It doesn't matter what else you do. You cannot do well without good fats. Period.
So are those the number one culprit when it comes to the cell membrane becoming inflamed?
Yeah, the by far. I mean, if I encourage everybody to try to Google how canola oil is made. There's a really nice video that the Canola Council of Canada puts out. Watch that video. If you watch that video, you will never ever go near a processed vegetable oil again because they're all done the same way, and it's absolutely make you throw up. What they do is they take the oil, they heat it up multiple times. It actually goes rancid because of it, so it smells like rotten fish. They deodorize it, they decolorize it, then they put it in bottles and tell you it's a healthy oil, and it can sit on a shelf for years and never go bad. And it's like, that's not what you should be putting in your body, ever.
I agree. When I go to restaurants, I always ask as well, and I tell them that I'm allergic, and I ask for one of the healthier oils, which we'll get into some of the ones that we recommend. Before we do, is there a test that you recommend for somebody to test their cell membrane health and inflammation?
So a lot of people are doing these fatty acid ratio tests,
Yeah.
and I don't find them that useful because the problem is that your serum or red blood cell fatty acid ratios are only reflective of the fatty acid ratios in that specific space. And one of the things that the body does is it distributes omega-6s and omega-3s in the ratios that is needed based on the function of that cell. So yeah, your blood can be 4-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3, but your muscle's 6.5-to-1. Your brain is 100-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3, and your skin and the interior of your arteries is 1,000-to-1. So there is no omega-3 in your skin. And so taking a blood measurement is not actually truly reflective of what's going on inside your body. And that makes sense because our cells have multiple different functions. We're not all made up of the same cell. We may have the same genetics in every cell, but every cell performs radically different functions. And you can imagine that a cell that's encased in bone is not going to be the same as the cell that's roaming around in your bloodstream. Right? That would make no sense. And so their membranes have to be altered based on function. Your skin is a barrier. It keeps bad things out. It keeps all the good things in.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be the same fatty acid content as your blood. If your skin was made of the same thing as your blood, we'd fall apart. I mean, it would be kind of gross.
So we know that those tests are flawed. The fatty acid tests are flawed based off of what you just said. What about a test to determine inflammation around the cells? Like I use a test called a meta-oxy test, which gives me a good idea. Do you have anything like that you recommend or use?
I do the high sensitivity CRP, the C-reactive protein. I mean, I'm a physician, right? So when we do blood tests as a physician, we're sort of in this box, right? That we have a standard blood requisition form that's standard for all of the province that I'm from Canada, so I practice in Canada. And so ordering tests outside that box starts costing people money and stuff like that. So I work with naturopaths who sort of get into the more specialized testing for that. But I just do look for general inflammation states. I also do an ANA, which is an anti-nuclear antibody on everybody because there's a crap load of autoimmune diseases out there. In fact, as you know, our friend Dr. Pompa stated at a recent seminar that about 98% of Americans probably have an autoimmune disease right now.
Yeah.
Which is pretty astounding. The ANA test is an anti-nuclear antibody. It's basically a test for autoimmune disease. it's positive way more often than I've ever seen. And I've been practicing medicine for 30 years. It's way more common now than it ever has been. So, and it's probably not as sensitive as some of the tests that naturopaths get for autoimmune disease, and looking at certain antibodies that are attacking our cells, basically our immune system basically attacking our cells, because we have so much. You can imagine, if you have a chronic inflammatory state, eventually the body's going to say, well, I guess you're the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts attacking us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our own immune system starts attacking us. And, and we see that. I mean, you've seen, I'm sure, in your client base, I'm sure you have a ton of rheumatoid arthritis patients. When I first started practicing medicine 30 years ago, rheumatoid arthritis was something you saw in your 70s and 80s. Would never see it in a young person, but now we have all these 20-year-old women with rheumatoid arthritis. Like it's an epidemic. And I see it all the time, and I'm going, this is not normal. We are basically, now our bodies are starting to attack ourselves.
Yeah, I see it often as well.
Yeah.
Let's circle back to the vegetable oils.
Mhm.
They are the number one culprit we see out there, even worse than sugar and cigarettes. What's that cigarette stat that Brian Peskin shared with us?
That's a great stat. I don't know where he found that, but the rate of cancer in smokers is about 16%, which surprises a lot of people, right?
Yeah, surprised me.
And it took years to prove that, right? And tobacco didn't even want that. But it looks like people who consume adulterated vegetable oils, their cancer rate is 83%. It's 5 times more dangerous than smoking. And
that's within, and he said that's within a 25-year period too.
yeah, and so I mean, look at it this way. So smoking rates in North America are now as low as they ever have been in 60 years, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And yet cancer rates keep going up exponentially. I mean, the rate of cancer now in the population is well over 60%, I think. At some point, we're going to get cancer at a rate of 60%. 60.
Yeah.
Most of us. Where in 1900, and they did keep good records, 1900 cancer rates were about 3%. And people and we keep researching genetic causes of cancer, and they said that's insane. This is 120 years ago. What's that? 6 generations? You can't have something go up that much in 6 generations.
Right.
It might increase by 1 or 2%, but not go up by 20-fold. I mean, that's just not reasonable. It means we'd have to actually search out and only mate with people who have other genetic disorders similar to ours, and make sure we're purebred genetic disorders. I don't see that happening. I don't think the dating apps are good for screening for genetic abnormalities.
Right. I don't think so. Yeah. I mean, it's a devastating trend that is going in the wrong direction. But this message is so important. So if you're watching this right now or listening on the podcast, this is an episode that you want to share with your community. You could just text it to a friend to listen to this information, because you understand how cancer works, how disease develops. It's that connection between the cell membrane and the nucleus, and it really is what you are putting in your body. And it goes back to the vegetable oils. And these vegetable oils, they're hidden everywhere. They're ubiquitous. If you go to Whole Foods and you're getting the hot food bar, you just read the ingredients, there's going to be vegetable oils. In the olive bar, there's going to be vegetable oils. On your keto packaged protein bar, there's going to be vegetable oils. So vegetable oils is the only thing that I do not make an exception with. I'll have sugar, I'll have carbs once in a while, but when I do not make an exception with vegetable oils, because in Brian Peskin's book, The PEO Solution, he showed that just at one plate of French fries that was fried in canola oil resulted in 132 days of cell membrane dysfunction.
It's like, wow.
It's like, well, no, I don't want that in my body. So I know that I do probably get vegetable oils somewhere that I'm unaware of, when I'm out, but I do my best to avoid it as much as possible.
But what's really interesting is when you do clean up your diet, right? If you do, and I challenge everybody to do this, try doing it for a month. Be eating really clean for 1 month, and then you'll cheat. Like everybody cheats, right? Everybody does it. Because it's everywhere, right? But what happens is your body will tell you almost immediately that something bad has happened, right? You'll get some gut upset, your energy level will drop. I mean, I remember when I cleaned up my diet, I was pretty good for about 6 months, and then the kids ordered pizza, right? And pizza smells really good. So I said, slice or two. but literally within hours on the couch. I was tired and your stomach, your body knows. It knows when you're screwing it up. The problem is as we have a population that's so inflamed right now, they think that's normal.
Yeah.
And then they start getting arthritis in their 40s, and they're going, oh well, I'm just getting old. I said, 40s getting old? What? Since when? That's not true. I mean, my grandmother, she was raised in rural Cape Breton Island, ate fried fish and potatoes, fried fish and bacon fat, by the way,
Oh,
the
nice.
good stuff. And she only lived until she was 99 years old, in spite of the fact that her cholesterol was off the charts,
Yeah.
right? And this other thing with attacking cholesterol drives me insane too. But that's
Yeah, which is another rabbit hole that we won't get into today. But so the first step, keto campers, remove the interference. The interference are these inflammatory fats. Second step is to add some of the healing fats. So what are some of the good oils out there?
Yeah. So the seed oils are best, right? So we're talking pumpkin seed oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil is extremely good. We have Indian primrose oil for people who are really inflamed, and for the omega-3 side, you want to put flaxseed oil in there. Now, but you've got to be very careful. Again, it's about how these oils are extracted. So a lot of the stuff you can buy these raw oils off the shelf, and a lot of them say cold pressed, but they're not cold pressed in the absence of oxygen. Now, remember, oxygen is attracted to these fats, right? They want to carry oxygen, but if oxygen is bound to them already, they can become oxidized, which means they become rancid. And a lot of companies, unfortunately, may do cold pressing, but they don't do it under an anoxic or no oxygen environment. So the oils that we have are extracted under a blanket of nitrogen. So there's no oxygen in the room they're extracted in, and therefore they cannot be oxidized. And then they're immediately put in capsules or bottles under that same environment, which makes them shelf stable for a long period of time. So the fats, when you consume them, you either have to be raw seeds themselves, which is pretty hard to do these days, or extracted properly and kept in an oxygen-free environment, so that they're just as good as fresh from the ground. Because you remember, if you're following a keto diet or a paleo diet or something like that, you have to remember that we're meant to eat these fresh from the ground, right? And so they don't have a chance to oxidize if they're within their seed husk and all that sort of stuff. But once you cook them, or once you just let them sit on the shelf, they're oxidizing. They're sitting there oxidizing, and therefore they're getting damaged. And so those good fats, they have to be protected from oxygen. That's what kills their function. And so by just if you can get almonds or walnuts or whatever, and they have good oil content. But if you're cooking them first or roasting them, you're destroying the fatty acid content, and you're actually destroying their function. So they have to be consumed raw. Some people they soak them in water for a little while before they do it. I mean, there's different ways, because obviously some of them are not as easy to digest as others. There's all sorts of tricks. But once you start cooking them, or you press them and leave them open to the air, you're just as bad as if you're eating a processed seed oil. Maybe not just as bad, but getting towards that.
Yeah. So to be clear, Jeff is the founder of PureForm. PureForm. So if you're watching this right now, you could see the bottle here. I've spoken about this several times. PureForm has exactly these fats that you were suggesting, and it's extracted under this blanket of nitrogen. So I have been personally taking this for over a year and a half now, and it gives me that exact content of a healthy omega-6 fats, these parent essential oils, these essential fatty acids that feed the cell membrane. So you want to talk a little bit more about your product, and then I want to relate this to the cell membrane and how the cell membrane protects us against viruses.
Okay, so this product was actually developed by Brian, who you know, and Brian and I have worked together for God knows 9 years now. So
Brian Peskin.
that's Brian Peskin, yeah. So the amount of sort of stories of clinical improvements I've seen using this product is pretty astounding, and it goes the whole gambit of different diseases. Um, Early on, when I first started going down this path, my business partner, he when I was he came to see me because he had some lower back issues, and I just sort of run into this product, and so I gave some to him, and a month later he calls me up and he says, you know, what in the hell is in this stuff? And I said, well, what's going on? He says, I'm over 60 years old and I still play competitive hockey and I'm out skating all the 30-year-olds on my team. And that's sort of when I started keying off that there was something more going on here to it. And it brought me back to this whole idea of, you know, obviously he's getting better because he's getting better cardiovascular performance, better oxygenation. He's been able to stay in aerobic metabolism much longer in the recovery periods from, you know, because when you're playing hockey, it's a lot of short bursts of energy. His recovery time is much shorter. So that was a living example of something that improved almost immediately with consuming the right oils. And then I started getting what really keyed me off about what we could do with this product, how powerful it was, is I had a couple patients in my practice. One was a diabetic and one was a vasculopath. So she had you know, a quadruple bypass. But what happened is she came in crying my office one day because her right leg was cold and dying because she had clotted it off. Her vessels were, her arteries were so clogged that she literally was booked for an amputation. And I said, I just gave her some bottles. I said, you start taking lots of these. I gave her, to take 8 a day. And so she came back a month later. Her leg was warm and pink, and she canceled her surgery.
Wow.
And I was like going, well, that's pretty impressive. And then I had another guy who's a diabetic who was scheduled for an amputation of his foot because he had a non-healing wound on the bottom of his foot. And again, I said, just start taking these as much as you can, 8 a day. And then 5 weeks later, he came back and he said he canceled his surgery. You know, and at that point, I've been doing medicine for about 22 years, 23 years. And I'd seen diabetic wounds and I'd seen people get their legs cut off because of vasculopathies. I'd never seen anyone cancel their amputation surgery before, never run into it. And then I realized that I mean, that's powerful. When you can cancel amputation surgeries because of a product that all it does is make you healthy, improve oxygenation of tissues, you know you're on the right path. And so we're able to do a small unpublished study in diabetics, and we did find indeed within 4 months we healed 86% of diabetic wounds with no recurrence in 6 months. And I've never seen a study like that ever in the medical literature. And it's just an impressive effect. And I've got other stories, clinical stories that we could go into, but different other diseases, states, and things like that. But again, that, you know, always have to be careful making claims. But you know, this is a really important area that if you want to start healing any disease state, you have to start with the cell membrane first. You cannot, nothing else will work longer term unless you do that.
Those are amazing testimonials. Yeah, I love this product. I can't tell you how much this has made a big difference for me. And if you want to learn more about this, we talk a little bit more on episode 75 of the Keto Camp podcast. I recommend getting off of your fish oil, your krill oil, any of these cod liver oils, and switching to something like this. And if you want to learn why, go listen to that episode 75 of the Keto Camp podcast. Now, let's relate all this before we wrap up this awesome interview. Let's relate all this to how do getting these right fats into the body and oxygen into the body help with the cell membrane's ability to fight off these enveloped viruses like the coronavirus and other viruses out there.
Yeah. So many of the viruses out there have an envelope, and the envelope is made of lipids. Surprise, surprise, like all the other membranes. And it's interesting because there's a study published last year looking at a specific issue, and it turns out that the lipid content of your membrane is actually really important to whether those viruses get access to your cells or not. So it turns out that not only do the proper membrane composition prevent the cells from emitting the virus in the first place, therefore you don't get it, but the proper fats actually actually can kill the virus. It can actually strip off the envelope from it and kill the virus, which is something I didn't realize. And so this study looked at it, and it turns out linoleic acid, which is the omega-6, arachidonic acid, and the medium chain saturated fats, such as from coconut oil,
Hmm.
uh, actually kill viruses. And it turns out that if you look at the fatty acid cascade, I don't know, you can find this out there. I don't know if I can pull this up or whether I can share it with you or not.
Yeah, if you can, that would be
Can I do
great.
this? Let me see if I can do this. Uh, let's see. Does that work?
Yep. So
See
those of
that?
you who are watching now, and Jeff's going to explain it in a way where even if you're listening, you could understand it. But those of you who are watching could see the screen right now.
Yeah. So this is the icosanoid fatty acid cascade, and you can see the omega-6 over here, starting with linoleic acid, and the omega-3 over here, which is the alpha linolenic acid. Okay. And so now this delta 6 desaturase enzyme is the one key enzyme that all the fish oil promoters keep pointing at and saying it doesn't function well in humans. Therefore, we need to uh, 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 provide fish oil for you to help with that process. But that's actually wrong. There is some desaturase 6 problems and desaturase 5 problems, but they're mostly related to drug use actually. So if you're on pharmaceutical drugs, they can actually inhibit this quite well, and that can make you harder to use these fats properly. But if you look at these, I assume that none of your clients are on medication because they're all healthy.
That's right.
That's right. So,
Or they're getting off of it.
that's right. So here's what's happened. So the omega-6 is the most important actually. Look at all these things that are produced. So the omega-6 goes down to gamma linoleic acid, which is called GLA, and then it goes to dihomo gamma linoleic acid, DGLA. Look what goes off here to the side, PGE1. This is extremely important. This is the most powerful anti-inflammatory the body makes. Okay, so it's responsible for why people on this product feel their joints get better so fast and stuff. It's much more powerful than any of the anti-inflammatories like Advil and naproxen and all those sorts of things. But then you go down the next step, you get arachidonic acid, which we talked about in killing viruses. But look at all these other factors it does: the thromboxanes, the prostaglandins, all the other inflammatory factors that are used in killing viruses and stuff. These are it. Now there's some produced by the omega-3 side, but it's not nearly as important as the omega-6 side. Okay, this produces way more stuff. And when you put DHA and EPA into this system here, these systems are not actually unidirectional. They don't go just straight down. They actually go back and forth. And so you can actually inhibit the production of some of these things by actually consuming too much EPA, DPA, and DHA. So um, so uh, so it's terribly important that the omega-6 intake is proper, because it allows you not only to fight viruses by having a proper structure of your cell membrane, but also all the other factors that help you fight off infection and kill viruses are all made from the omega-6 side.
Very cool.
And what's interesting is that uh, the omega-6, only 1% or probably less of the omega-6 that we consume actually go down this pathway. Almost all of it's used for structure. So we don't need um, a huge amount of these omega-3s and things like that because this is what bothers me so much is most scientists are looking at this cascade and thinking that's the be all end all, not knowing that the biggest purpose of omega-6 omega-3 is actually in the membrane structure, and they don't need to go down this pathway to participate in membrane structure issues. And so that's why it's so important to consume these healthy fats, is you have a healthy cell membrane. These are actually minor amounts are used to produce these things. So these things are very powerful. So you don't need much of it around. You don't need grams and grams of omega-6 going down this pathway to produce these things. You need micrograms going down, because the body, these things are so powerful and so effective, right? So literally only a little bit goes down these pathways. Most of it is used as structure. I can't emphasize that enough. Structure first, right?
Awesome, Jeff. Yeah, that was a great breakdown. So if you're listening to this and you want to see what we're looking at here, the video interview is on the Keto Camp YouTube channel, youtube.com/KetoCamp. And out of the, so let's close this loop here and unshare your screen if you can.
How do I do that?
There should be a stop share button somewhere. Let's
Sharing.
see. Stop participant sharing. I got it.
Oh,
So let's close.
that.
Let's close this loop here. We know the audience, I believe the audience has a good understanding of the importance of the cell membrane and how it works and why we want to give the body these essential fatty acids, the right fats, eliminate the bad ones, add the right ones to feed the cells what it wants. Because when it comes to the cell membrane, you mentioned this on the last episode, but not today yet. 25 to 33% of that cell membrane is made up of these omega-6 fats, correct?
Correct.
So we want to feed it what it's made of and not the building blocks that causes the inflammation and causes the disease. So final thoughts here on, or final closing words on this interview, Dr. Matheson.
Well, I think people hopefully will get a good idea that the importance of fats to membrane health. Membrane health is everything. Mitochondrial health is essential, otherwise nothing functions in your cell. Get away from the fact that genetics genetics is basically maps out your life, and that's all there is to it. You can influence chronic diseases, and in today's world, you can influence acute diseases. If you look, I bet you if you get a picture of every single person that has had an issue in this current environment, you will see someone with multiple medical conditions that are all related to very bad fatty acid metabolic issues. You correct those, you should be golden. You shouldn't have any worries through this period of time.
I agree. So we have a coupon code for PureForm. If you want to try it out, I'm going to put a link in the notes of this podcast and on the notes of this YouTube video. We have a $3 off and $4 off coupon code for the Keto Camper. So you can find that in the notes down below. Give it a try. I've been giving this to myself, of course, to my dog, to my girlfriend, to my mom. I always say that because it has made such a big difference. What?
Safe for dogs, safe for cats.
Safe for dogs, safe for cats, exactly. And actually, I just thought of something before we wrap this up. On our first interview, you were talking about the I forget the name of the disease, the skin disorder. What is it called?
Oh, epidermolysis bullosa. Yes.
Yeah, and you were doing some
children.
Butterfly children. You were doing some experiment with that. So update us on that.
So for those of you who didn't see the interview in September of last year, we got introduced to a couple of members of the EV community. They're also known as butterfly children. These people are born with a genetic deficiency of collagen 7, so their skin is extremely fragile, and when you touch them, they blister. They're always getting dressing changes. It's a pretty horrible disease. It's like living with a 3rd-degree burn your entire life. We got a few kids on it, and they had a remarkable improved healing rate of these wounds that they had. In fact, we had an 18-month-old who started walking for the first time because he no longer would get blisters on his feet.
Wow.
Which is pretty incredible. So we now have about 40 kids on it now, and uniformly we're getting really positive feedback on functionality, decreased number of wounds, better healing rates. I mean, it's really quite satisfactory to make a difference in that many people's lives. This is a fairly rare disorder. There's about 250 in Canada, or 300 in about 2,000 or 3,000 in the United States. I don't know if your podcast people know of anyone with this disease. We're actually giving away the product for free to kids to try. No strings attached. There's no financial obligation. All we want is the data of how they're doing, some pictures of their wounds, but they can contact us directly through, they can do it by email at jeff@pureformomega.com. They can do it through you. I don't care. I just want to get some kids on this. I want to see the results. I want to confirm the results. I want to have this sort of groundswell from the bottom to try and convince our academics that we have to look at membrane health, and it's way more important than people think, because the traditional way of treating this disease is, it's some of the radical steps some people have taken. There was a very famous case where a 14-year-old underwent a stem cell transplant to try and fix the disease, and he ended up dying of overwhelming sepsis because, they have to they have to actually give him chemotherapy to kill all his bone marrow before they can do it. That's, I mean, it's sad because, you know, what if we could help them just with a supplement? That would.
Yep. That's amazing, Dr. Jeff. Yeah, so if you're listening to this or watching this and you know somebody with this disease, this the butterfly children, please get this information into their hands. Send Dr. Jeff an email at Jeff at, what was it?
PureFormOmega.com.
Jeff at PureFormOmega.com. I'll put his email in the notes of this podcast. And this is such a great opportunity for them to get this product for free, for them to see some improvement, because those are some amazing testimonials. Well, Dr. Jeff, I want to thank you, your business partner, John. Let's just give a shout out to John, to Brian Peskin, and just everybody that behind the scenes, Julia, everybody behind the scenes that helps put the product together, because this is one of my favorite products that I have come across, and it's made a big difference for myself personally, my dog, my family, but also a lot of my clients. So I thank you for the work that you're doing. You're one of the most brilliant researchers out there. I love it when we hop on and we have a conversation, or we see each other at a seminar and we have these conversations. And I look forward to hearing more about the breakthrough research you're doing and also all these testimonials. So I thank you for your time today, and I thank you for the great product you created.
Thank you, man. It's been a joy.